guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. Happy New Year! I don't know why I just said it like that. It's New Year's Eve, the day that I'm filming this. I'm not sure what day you're watching this, but it'll be the new year, so it still applies. If you can tell from the state of my bookshelves behind me, I don't know if it's noticeable. We have a lot of books to talk about today. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of the decade, which is actually a perfect amount of time to talk about. I'm currently 23 years old, and I feel like I really got into reading when I was around 12 or 13, so it's been a solid 10 years of reading. And I thought a fun way to do this would be to break it down by the year so we can kind of see my evolution of reading as well as talking about my favorite books from each year. So with that said, the way I decided to do this was Marie Kondo it. I looked at all of the books that I'd read in each year, and so I chose the books that when I looked at them sparked joy. Like I had a reaction to it. It's something that's memorable to me even, you know, 6-7 years later. It's something that I feel like had a big impact on my life reading. So this is 100% my favorites that I've read in the last 10 years, not like objectively the best books of the decade, obviously. So with that said, let's take a journey through the past 10 years. We'll start as far back as we can go. I actually didn't join Goodreads until 2014. So I don't have any specific data before that. I didn't track my reading before that, so I'm kind of guessing from 2010 to 2013, but then 2014 on we have very solid data. So yeah, I'll have all of the books that I talk about today linked down below in the description if you want to go check them out. I also already put up my favorite books of 2019 and least favorite books of 2019 videos. So I'll have those linked down below if you want to wrap up of just this previous year. But other than that, let's just get straight into the video. So we'll start with pre-2013. So before 2013, I would have been a sophomore in high school, I think, and I really started to get into reading around 7th grade, 8th grade. So around this time, I was reading things like The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, when I found Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. I got really into Lauren Oliver's books like Delirium. I was in love with when I first read it. This was my favorite book for a while when I was like 13. This was when I read Harry Potter. I know, I was late to Harry Potter. I watched almost all of the movies before I finally read the books in 8th grade. I read the Pretty Little Liars books. This was that whole era for me. I'm not going to dwell on these books or give you descriptions of them because they're all really popular. I think they're pretty well known, but these are the kind of books that really stick out to me in my early reading life as books that really got me into reading in the first place. So feel free to debate the quality of them. I'm not going to argue with you, but they were enough to make me fall in love with reading, and 10 years later we're still rolling, so I think that says something. And then in the actual year of 2013, the only reason why I can remember that I read this in 2013 is because that's when it was released. My favorite book of 2013 was definitely Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. This is the last book in the Infernal Devices trilogy, which is a prequel trilogy to The Mortal Instruments. And still to this day, you know, I look back on it 7 years later and I loved this book. This book was fantastic. It was everything that I wanted in the last book in a series. I'm thinking I want to reread this trilogy because I remember loving it so much, and I owe a lot to Cassandra Clare with my early reading life. Like, she hooked me in and she got me reading a lot of books. I feel like that was the first like really long series I read, was all of the Mortal Instruments books and then all of the spin-off series, so she kept me reading for quite a long time. Okay, so for 2014 we can actually jump into real statistics and specific books for specific years. So in 2014, I read 76 books. 2014 would have been my junior year of high school. I feel like I probably honestly read even more than that in 2013. 2014 was peak reading time for Katie. She was not yet super busy, and she didn't yet have a lot of other hobbies besides reading, honestly. Despite reading 76 books that year though, I've only picked out 3 that have remained favorites, like I would still recommend to this day. Also, for those of you who are constantly asking about why my books are backwards and if I can find my books, this video was the ultimate test, and yes, I could find all of the books pretty easily, actually. Also, just to clear that up, because I get a question about this on every single video that I post, which is fine. I'm not like angry at the people who asked this, but after answering it 15 times, it gets very tedious. The only reason why the books are backwards is because I like it that way. There is no reason. There is no organizational system. There's nothing. They just are like that for no reason. So my 3 favorites from 2014 are actually all series. So in total, the series have like 13 books in them. So that's a pretty hefty chunk of my reading year. 2014 was the year that I read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater and fell in love with this series. 2014 was also the year that I read the Bloodline series by Rochelle Mead, which I loved. This is the spin-off series to Vampire Academy, and I enjoyed this series even more than I loved Vampire Academy. And 2014 is when I found this very underrated gem, Grave Mercy by Robin Lefevers. Love this book, still recommend this all the time. This is the first book in a trilogy about assassin nuns. It's like a historical fantasy. Each of the 3 books follows a different point of view character, but you get to see the other characters in there. Love these books. Loved them so much more than I was expecting to. If it feels like I'm blowing through some of these books, I'm just not describing the popular series because I feel like everyone's heard a million things about them. So then we go to 2015 and we see a bit of a dip in my reading. 2015 is the year that I graduated high school. I read 66 books that year, still a decent amount. That was the year that I started college. And I also have 3 notable books to talk about for this year. This was the year that I read the Immortal Rules trilogy by Julie Kagawa. I love this series. It's a paranormal romance trilogy with vampires. Still highly recommend it. Loved the audiobooks for these. I vividly remember listening to the audiobooks. I had an internship the summer after I graduated high school and I was just scanning things and stuff. I was in an office and I could just listen to audiobooks all day. So I vividly remember spending quality time with that copy machine listening to these books. It was also the year that I read The Passage by Justin Cronin. This is an adult horror novel also about vampires. Fan-freaking-tastic. It's also the first book in a series. I never read the rest of the series, but this is one of my all-time favorite adult books. I recommend it all the time. There's a TV adaptation of this also. It only got 1 season and it wasn't fantastic, but it's out there. This year was also one of the first years that I really started to dive into adult books because I read this in a sci-fi, fantasy, and horror class that I took as an elective as a senior. And pretty much all of the books that we read in that class were adult books that I ended up loving and made me realize, hey, maybe I can read outside of young adult, which is how I went to pick up this book on my own. And now this book is one of my all-time favorites. Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is an adult psychological thriller. I feel like I've talked about it in a lot of videos recently because it's, like I said, one of my all-time favorites. So happy that I found this book. And this book definitely started my love of thrillers, which is now one of my all-time favorite genres. So then we jump to 2016. And there's a big dip in the reading this year. This was my freshman into my sophomore year of college. I read 56 books this year, and I really remember not reading for like half of this year. All of that reading that happened was like over the summer. But this is probably one of the biggest years in my reading life. This is the year that I started my booktube channel, and this is the year that I read a lot of my all-time favorite books. This was the year that I started the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. Funny, actually, I think I tried to read this first book a couple of years before this, and I didn't like it, and I couldn't get into it. And then this year I read the audiobook of this one. Still didn't love it, but I continued to push through the series and then I ended up liking it the further I got into it. And as I was on a kick with Sarah J Maas books, that was when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses and started this series, which I loved way more than I loved Throne of Glass. 2016 was the year that I read Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It's a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. It's like an origin story for the Queen of Hearts. And I keep saying I want to reread this book and I haven't gotten around to it. I think that's definitely going to happen in 2020. Definitely my all-time favorite Alice in Wonderland retelling. I forgot to include this. I don't know when I read this for the first time. I reread this for the first time in 2016. The Unbecoming of Mardire, one of my all-time favorite books. I think I probably read this for the first time in 2013. Or 2012. It was in high school. I think it was either my freshman or my sophomore year of high school is when I found this book. And it's my all-time favorite. I think I would give this book the title of my all-time favorite book just for like nostalgic reasons. But 2016 was the year that I reread this because I hosted my very first read-along on my channel. I'm dropping things. We had the Mardire readathon. Oh my god, that's such a throwback. I was a sophomore in college. That was when my booktube channel was just starting to get a little bit of traction. I think I probably had around 2,000 subscribers at the time. That was the year that I did the Cassandra Clare read along with a couple of other booktubers and we did live shows as we read each of the books in that series. God, that feels like a million years ago. I'm getting such like a walk down memory lane doing this. 2016 was also the year that I read You by Caroline Kepnes. Loved this book at the time. Vividly remember reading this in my dorm room my sophomore year and just not being able to put it down. And I vividly remember standing there at my desk. Like I hadn't even sat down. People walked in and were like, why are you standing there reading? Because I like hadn't even realized that I had just been standing there for an hour because I couldn't stop reading it. And then everyone wanted me to go out to a party that night and I was like, no, I'm gonna stay here and finish this book. And then 2016 was the year that I read Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. I know there's been a lot of discourse about her right now, especially on Twitter. Not gonna get into that here. But 2016 was the first year that I realized a different kind of poetry exists aside from like the classic kind that you read in class and stuff, and I really connected with it. And as you will see in the following year, I fell into a giant rabbit hole of reading a ton of different poetry and realizing that I actually really loved poetry, which is so ironic because I used to adamantly hate poetry. Like in high school, there was a specific English class I was supposed to take that I was on the track to take, and I literally chose to take the class like below it just because I knew there was going to be a lot of poetry in that class and I didn't want to read poetry. And so 2016 was such a big year for me because it made me fall in love with poetry. And as you guys know, I went on to publish my own poetry and I write a lot of poetry now. So I look back very fondly on this year for a lot of different reasons. And for this book, I feel like 2016 was a really big year for me. I found poetry. I started my booktube channel. I found a lot of my favorite books. I studied abroad. I left the country for the first time ever that year. It was just such a big year for me. And then we go to 2017. And this year is a year I don't talk about a lot. This was probably the hardest year of my life. I had a lot of really rough things happen in 2017. And so my reading dipped to the lowest it's ever been since I got into reading. I read 49 books that year, which might still sound like a lot. A lot of those were poetry books. Novels, I probably read maybe 30. Like, it was my lowest reading year. This was my junior year of college. This was the year when I really put together The Sweetest Kind of Poison, then I went on to publish it the following summer. This was the year that I studied abroad for a full 6 months. Big year. Not for good reasons, but big year for like growth reasons for me. And so the only books that I have to talk about for 2017 are The Female of the Species by Minnie McGinnis, which is one of my all-time favorite books. I still recommend this all the time. As you can probably tell from my excessive tabbing, I hadn't connected with a book like this in so long. I actually picked this book up after like not reading for probably like 3 months and being so relieved that this made me like fall in love with reading again and it made me want to read again. And then the only other books that were really notable for me in 2017 were poetry collections. I read Neon Soul by Alexandra L. Loved this one. I read Mouthful of Forevers by Clementine Von Radek, Stuff I've Been Feeling Lately by Alicia Cook. I have an entire video about my whole poetry collection and my favorite poetry books, so I would kindly direct you over there if you want to hear me talk about poetry because I've read so many collections, but these are 3 really noticeable ones from that year. I read a lot of poetry that I now don't like, but at the time helped me through those hard times. I read kind of that like Instagram modern poetry stuff that now I look back on and I'm like, I read a lot of R.H. Sin, I read like Amanda Lovelace, a lot of the popular poets, and then I started to find the more underrated books that I found that I liked a lot more. But yeah, 2017 was a year of poetry for sure. And then 2018. Things started to get better for me in 2018. I got home from study abroad, started my senior year of college, finally got back into reading again, finally got back into loving making videos again. In 2017, for like 6 months, I think I posted maybe 1 book-related video. I did post other videos, but they weren't related to books. I was kind of lost. I've since privated most of those videos. And 2018 is when I finally started to feel like I was getting back to myself. 2018 was the year that I published my first poetry collection, The Sweetest Kind of Poison. And I have a lot of favorites from 2018. I really started to read some good books in 2018. 2018 was the year that I started the Diviners series by Libba Bray, which has gone on to be one of my all-time favorite series. I didn't realize it at the time in 2018. In 2018, I read the first book, thought it was okay, and then never continued on. But 2019, I gave it a second chance and then realized how much I loved it. Another notable poetry collection from 2018 was Helium by Rudy Francisco. Loved this one. I have reread it several times. 2018 was the year that I found Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books. I reread it once every year now. It's about creativity, finding ideas, being a writer. This will forever be one of my all-time favorite books. I'm so glad I found this in 2018. I found this at a time when I was still struggling and still having a really hard time, and this book made a really big difference for me. I read Semiosis by Sue Burke in 2018. Loved this. This is an adult science fiction novel. These books are notable whenever I like found something that I loved in a genre that I never read and made me realize maybe I will like this genre. This one was a big one for me with science fiction. 2018 was the year that I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I no longer have a copy of this because I gave it to my friend, but I'm going to get another copy. This is another adult thriller. Loved it. Realized I loved Blake Crouch and I've gone on to read more of his books now. I recommend this book all the time. Loved it. You should read it. Was amazing. Did I say how many books I read in 2018? I read 55 books. So then we get to 2019. And 2019, my reading finally peaked up again a little bit. I read 64 books this year. I graduated college. I moved out. I started my own business. Like, it's been a really big year for me personally. And I finally got into a groove and found time and decided to start making time for reading again. It was the year that I really started making time for writing again and kind of digging back up my old goals that I'd kind of buried for the last 4 years when I was too busy with college. And I have a lot of books that I loved this year. Like I said, I have that whole favorite books of 2019 video, which I'll link down below. So since I go into all of these books really in depth in that video, I'm not going to do that here. But I read Recursion by Blake Crouch. Loved it. Finally got around to reading another one of his books after Dark Matter. I read the rest of the Diviners series. Loved it. Like I said, one of my new all-time favorite series. I read I Miss You When I Blink by Mary Laura Philippou. This is a collection of essays. I can confidently say I have never loved a collection of essays before this one, but this is one of my favorite books of the year. I read the entire Cruel Prince trilogy this year and had so much fun with it. This book made me feel like I was back in 2013 and finding all of these young adult series again, and the way that I binge read them and just completely fell into the story and was obsessed with them and loved them and could really just like turn my brain off for a little bit and just be immersed in the story. And I feel like I don't read that way as often anymore, unfortunately. I'm more critical of the books that I read. I'm harder to please now, and sometimes I miss how when I was younger I didn't have as many books to compare things to. Like, I hadn't read that much, so I didn't know what was great and what wasn't great, and I just pretty much enjoyed most things that I read. And that's not the case anymore. And this book, it felt like I was 16 and just naive and innocent and just enjoying all of these books again despite their flaws, and it was a very nice feeling. I read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is an adult fantasy. I've always thought I wouldn't like adult fantasy, so this was a nice, pleasant surprise. Loved it. Was so magical, was so captivating. I read Girls with Sharp Sticks by Suzanne Young. So powerful, so surprising. I checked this out from the library on a whim, fell in love with it, and promptly went out and bought my own copy. I read Verity by Colleen Hoover. This has been the year of Verity by Colleen Hoover. I have not shut up about it since I read this back in like February, maybe January, honestly. Another psychological thriller. Killed me. Was so good. The #1 book that I recommend from 2019 is this book. And then I have You Are a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero. Shocking, surprising, was not expected. Loved this book, listened to it on audiobook, found it highly motivating, really inspiring, and it's definitely something that I would reread. So there you have it. Those are my favorite books of the decade. This was so much fun, actually, because I can remember a lot of the times where I was when I was reading a book, what was happening in my life at the time, what I was like, what I was going through. So it's kind of interesting to look back at like the last 10 years of my life through the books that I was reading. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would be super interested to know what some of your favorite books of the last 10 years have been. I know that's probably a ton to choose from. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having an awesome morning, afternoon, night, weekend, I don't know, whenever you're watching this, and Happy New Year. I hope you're excited for 2020. If you want to check out any of these books that I talked about today, I'll have links down below in the description for them. And if you're new here, I would love it if you would subscribe and stick around. I put up at least 2 to 3 new videos every single week, and hopefully we find some new favorites to read in the new year. If you give this video a thumbs up, I'd appreciate it a lot. It helps out my channel a lot. And all my links are down below in the description if you want to come follow me elsewhere. But other than that, I think I'll just see you guys in another video very, very soon. Bye.
So hit me. So hit me. So hit me. First a confession. With you, I feel a connection. With